This photo is so terrifying because of what you can't see in the image. What's going on in this photo will make you physically sick. It was May 1977 in Eugene, Oregon, when 20-year-old Colleen Stan was hitchhiking to a friend's house in California. Now, she didn't actually have her own car or way of getting to her friend's birthday in California, so she was just flagging down cars like she'd done many times before. And a couple of cars actually stopped, but Colleen declined the lift because she got a bit of a bad vibe about the people stopping. Then one car stopped where she actually felt comfortable having a lift from these people. It was a man, his wife, and a baby in the back seat. She had no idea that when she climbed into the vehicle, she'd just entered a living nightmare. Inside the car was Cameron Hooker with his wife Janice and their child. And despite her initially feeling comfortable, she soon got a very bad feeling about this couple. Cameron started taking the back roads and just acting really suspicious. He said at this point something in her head was screaming at her to jump out of the car, but unfortunately she didn't listen. It was about 20 minutes later that Cameron actually pulled the car over, and Janice and the child got out and seemed to wander down to a lake. Cameron got in the back seat at that point and pulled a knife out on Colleen. He then grabbed essentially a torture box out of his vehicle and placed this over her head. Now, I'm claustrophobic, so this is my worst nightmare. The box was handmade and had essentially been made to prevent any light or fresh air getting inside. He threatened her not to make a scene and drove her back to the couple's house. This poor girl had no idea she'd been captured to become an slave for the couple. When they got her back home, they put her in the basement and hung her up by her wrists. Cameron then beat her and viciously attacked her, and she was obviously terrified for her life. Now, Cameron and his wife, it turns out, had come to some sick arrangement that she was going to let him do this to an innocent woman and just kind of keep her as a slave to satisfy his sick desires. That very first night after attacking her, they left her blindfolded and hung by her wrists while they had S underneath her. Colleen was in agony and petrified that she was going to be killed. Cameron then decided to store Colleen like an actual literal dead body. He locked that original head contraption around her head and kept her body imprisoned in another coffin-like box. And Cameron absolutely brainwashed this poor girl. Right from day one, he kept her scared for her life. He told her that he was part of this bigger organization called The Company, and they were going to be watching her every second of every day. He forced her to sign this contract saying she agreed to be his slave forever, and he basically said that if you don't sign the contract, I'm going to kill you and your family. So what choice did she have? She was tortured and locked inside this box for 23 hours a day. She wasn't even allowed to be referred to as her real name. He just called her Kay. It was so dehumanizing. She wasn't allowed to talk without permission. She had to go to the toilet in a bucket. Now, he didn't have intercourse initially with her fully because his wife disagreed with this for some reason, because she was jealous, but he was allowed to her with objects. Make it make sense. And this couple seemingly carried on as normal in every other aspect of their life. They obviously had kidnapped this slave in their basement, but they just carried on as normal, even having another baby. As the years went on, and I mean years and years and years of this horrific torture, Colleen was gradually kind of given more freedom. Now, this really reminds me of the JC Lee Dugard case. If you know about that case, you'll know exactly what I mean. If you haven't listened to my podcast episode about that, I would really highly recommend it. You can find it on The Bourne Investigation on Apple and Spotify. So Colleen was essentially allowed to go out for small walks and do things like that as the years went on. And eventually she was actually allowed to visit her family in 1981. This might sound really weird, but her poor family presumed that she'd been captured by a cult or something. She'd been brainwashed, which essentially she had, but not in the way that they thought. She'd obviously just disappeared and then come back and wanted to reconnect with them, but they had no idea she was being held captive. Cameron even went with her to visit her family and posed as her boyfriend. Bear in mind, Colleen at this point thought that there was a big organization called The Company watching her every move, and they would kill her family if she told them the truth. Family actually didn't want to upset her or frighten her away. They really were just savoring every moment that they could get with Colleen. They even took a photo of Cameron and Colleen together. I bet when it all came out after years later, they would just absolutely kick themselves. I mean, obviously in this photo, they very much do look like a happy couple. Nobody had any idea the true sick secrets that lay beneath this photo. She was then taken back to Cameron's home and once again held captive, using a bowl for the toilet, being arsed repeatedly. It was just absolutely foul. And Cameron didn't stick to his promise to his wife not to Colleen with his pee, because shock horror, turns out your husband that abducted a woman at knife point and kept her as an S-slave in the basement wasn't the most trustworthy partner. Now finally in 1984 there was a bit of a breakthrough for Colleen. There was a turning point. She'd gradually been given more freedom, as I said, and Cameron had even let her get a job. I think she was working as a maid in a hotel. Cameron told his wife that he wanted to make Colleen his other wife, his second wife if you will. It was only at this point that she became really jealous and put her foot down and said no. Janice ended up breaking down and telling Colleen the whole truth. She said that she herself had been brainwashed by Cameron since she was just 15 years old. Colleen called Cameron from a payphone after work, I believe. They weren't actually obviously in the house together, and she told him she was leaving him, and he broke down crying. But still, Colleen didn't go to the police at this point. She was honestly just happy to be rid of him, to see the back of him. Until months later, when Janice actually decided to call the police on her own husband, that this whole sordid secret came out. And there was more. Before Colleen was snatched, Cameron had kidnapped, tortured and murdered a 19-year-old girl. This was Marie Spanhake, who'd gone missing from Chico in California in 1976. Janice told police how he'd strangled her to death, and the couple both buried her body in a shallow grave. However, due to them not being able to actually find the girl's remains, they were actually never charged for this. Cameron was given 104 years in prison, but is apparently up for parole very soon.